You won't believe what just happened with Ibrahim Traoré. On a groundbreaking televised forum broadcast across West Africa, Kémi Séba, a fierce Pan-African activist and advocate for sovereignty, stunned the region with a bold statement directed at the interim president of Burkina Faso. Known for his unapologetic critiques of neocolonialism, Kemi stood firm, his words sharp, direct, and unrelenting. At 41, he brought not only rhetorical fire but hard accusations that could shake the narrative of West Africa's current revolutionary wave. He didn't hesitate. He didn't soften his blows. Every sentence was a deliberate strike aimed at Ibrahim Traoré's growing legacy as a military reformer and sovereignist. Before we dive into this historic clash, the host's voice rang out across the studio. Tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to Free Africa Media for unfiltered truth. The studio Sankara in Ouagadougou glowed under intense lights. The atmosphere pulsed with electricity and unease as the audience held their breath, fixated on the stage. Across Francophone Africa, millions tuned in, awaiting a debate unlike any before, between Kémi Séba, the intellectual firebrand of anti-imperial resistance, and Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the composed but commanding military leader of a new African order. The host, with a resonant and formal tone, stepped forward as though carrying the collective weight of the continent's question. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began solemnly, "welcome to a moment that may redefine our political conscience. Tonight's dialogue is not merely a debate, but a confrontation between vision and accountability." The camera panned slowly. Kemi, in a tailored dark robe of traditional West African style, his eyes intense like burning coal. Traoré, calm and guarded in his command uniform, eyes piercing yet unreadable. In a time when fewer than 30% of our people trust the regional media, when foreign-funded outlets like RFI and France 24 shape the public imagination, the host continued, the question of information sovereignty is more relevant than ever. He turned to Kemi. As the founder of the Pan-African NGO Urgences Pan-Africanistes, you've fiercely criticized how media narratives serve global powers. What is your view of Captain Traoré's media strategy? Kemi straightened his back, scanned the audience slowly, and then replied in a voice calm but sharp as obsidian. "Thank you. I'm here to reveal how Mr. Traoré, despite his anti-imperialist speeches, has orchestrated media campaigns to delegitimize fellow African dissidents and foreign-aligned critics, manipulating narratives just as the very empires he claims to fight do." The crowd stiffened. Some nodded in agreement, others muttered in discomfort. "He claims to be a liberator," Kemi continued, his voice gaining force. "But what we have seen is a consolidation of power through nationalized media and suppression of Pan-African voices that refuse to bow to military authority." He gestured to the screen behind him. It lit up with a timeline of coverage from national broadcasters and news websites showing negative stories about regional opposition figures and civil society leaders. These weren't organic stories, the way he said. They were the result of a centralized media strategy authorized from the very top. Applause and jeers clashed in the air. The host stepped in. "Mr. Traoré, you are now accused of manipulating Burkina Faso's media environment to secure your political positioning. How do you respond?" Traoré leaned forward, his face calm but firm. "Thank you. These accusations are completely false. I have never interfered with the media. My mission is to protect the sovereignty of the Burkinabe people, not to silence critics. Our press operates with autonomy, and we've never directed attacks on anyone." Cheers erupted from his supporters, but Kemi was unmoved. "Autonomy?" he asked, his voice cold as Harmattan wind. "Then explain these recorded meetings between your communications office and heads of state-aligned media in 2022 and 2023. Right before smear campaigns against civilian activists intensified." He held up a folder. "These documents list strategic sessions, scheduling, instructions, narrative targeting. This isn't independence. This is narrative warfare." He clicked a remote. The screen showed an internal directive: discredit civil society figures opposing military rule, linked to foreign influence. Gasps rippled through the room. The host steadied the moment. "Mr. Traoré, in an age where information is a weapon, you are being accused of using state media as a tool to maintain power. What do you say?" Traoré shook his head, voice firmer. "These are not authentic documents, and if they were, they'd be taken out of context. My government is transparent. We do not engage in information warfare. We protect the truth." Kemi smiled slightly, eyes fixed on Traoré. "The truth?" he asked, raising one eyebrow. "Then why do all these narratives just happen to follow your public declarations word for word?" He pressed another button. Media brief. Frame regional critics as destabilizing agents. Align with ECOWAS narratives when convenient. This, Kemi concluded, is not revolution. It is control. Not sovereignty, but strategic censorship under another name. The audience fell into a tense silence. Traoré's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with the awareness that this wasn't just a media critique anymore. It was the start of something deeper. The host stepped to the center of the stage, his presence dignified, his warm voice acting as a steadying force amid the rising tension. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, as public trust in both media and government continues to erode, only 28% of West Africans say they trust their national press. The question raised by Kémi Séba about media integrity and the power of leadership is one we must confront head-on. But he didn't stop there. Tonight's debate goes even deeper. As global superpowers jostle for influence across Africa, from French military withdrawals to rising Russian presence, Burkina Faso stands at a crossroads. What role will this nation play? And more importantly, will the legacy left behind be a stepping stone or a burden? He turned, fixing his gaze on Kémi Séba. Kemi, you have consistently spoken against foreign military alliances and warned of sovereignty being compromised under the guise of strategic defense. What is your assessment of the security pact between Burkina Faso and the Russian Federation, signed under Captain Traoré's leadership? The air in the studio froze. What followed wouldn't just be a policy critique, it would be a reckoning. Kemi leaned forward, eyes locked on Traoré, his voice low but cutting like a blade. Thank you. Mr. Traoré calls the pact with Russia a sovereign decision, but I stand here tonight to reveal it as a dangerous dependency, signed not for the people, but to burnish his legacy as a defiant military hero. The audience quieted, some nodded, others shifted uneasily. You say it was for security, Kemi continued, but what we've seen is a flood of foreign military presence, unaccountable and unchecked. You empowered mercenary groups, destabilized local command structures, and triggered diplomatic fallout with neighboring nations. He gestured and the screen lit up, a chart showing a 40% increase in foreign-sourced military expenditures and regional diplomatic breakdowns post-agreement. This is not sovereignty, Kemi declared, his voice soaring like a spear across the studio. This is a bargain that mortgaged our independence for short-term might. The host picked up the thread. Kemi, you described this deal as a concession. Recent intelligence reports confirm increased foreign troop movement across northern provinces, causing concern among ECOWAS allies. Captain Traoré, you've said the alliance prevents terrorism, but Kemi accuses you of jeopardizing regional peace. How do you respond? Traoré sat upright, hands calmly folded, voice low but resonant. Thank you, Kemi. To call this agreement a concession is not only inaccurate, it is dangerous. Burkina Faso has the sovereign right to choose its partners. This pact stopped foreign-backed insurgents in the north. It gave us control, not dependence. Supporters in the audience clapped, but Kemi remained motionless. Control? He asked, his tone glacial. Then explain why, following the pact, the Russian embassy discreetly transferred $300 million in security funds, unaccounted for in the public budget. He pressed a button. The screen showed a leaked communication. Payment must remain discreet to avoid international backlash. This is not defense, Kemi said with prosecutorial force. It's shadow financing that emboldens violence while silencing dissent. The crowd murmured. The host leaned in, his voice brimming with urgency. Kemi, you just framed this payment as state-backed secrecy in a time when African citizens demand financial transparency. Captain Traoré, he accuses you of accepting clandestine funds under a defense pretense. How do you respond? Traoré's expression darkened slightly, though his voice stayed composed. These claims are fabricated. The funds in question were part of a broader settlement package, legal, negotiated, and transparent to our oversight institutions. He straightened his posture. We are building alliances to protect our people. That is not betrayal. That is leadership in a time of war. The audience was silent, digesting his words. Kemi, however, was already preparing his next strike. Leadership? He asked, his voice suddenly sharp. Then why did these same troops conduct unsanctioned operations in the Sahel in direct violation of Article 9 of the National Security Code? He clicked once more. The screen showed an excerpt. Unauthorized military activity, Sahel region, August 2023, non-Burkinabe forces present. You didn't bring peace, Kemi said, eyes blazing. You outsourced our sovereignty to an unaccountable power bloc. The studio felt heavy. Tension crackled in the air. Meanwhile, across social media, the debate ignited like wildfire. A Pan-Africanist account posted, Kemi exposed the truth. Burkina Faso is a pawn in Russia's chessboard. A counterpost read, Traoré is Africa's shield, Kemi is sowing division. The lines were drawn, but the night was far from over. Meanwhile, across social media, the firestorm intensified. A prominent West African commentator posted a photo of Kémi Séba holding up leaked documents on state media collaboration. He's a warrior for sovereignty. The truth has a name. The establishment struck back. Kemi manipulates facts. The security pack saved lives. Where is his real proof? Threads exploded. Where are the original memos? Is this just another populist stunt? The media joined the frenzy. Jeune Afrique ran a headline calling Kemi a provocative figure testing the boundaries of African political discourse, while a viral post labeled him a torch of truth in the fog of militarized governance. Back in the studio Sankara, the atmosphere was still taut, like a drum just before it struck. The host, standing center stage with his familiar, dignified stance, redirected the discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, voice grounded yet firm, as social media debates explode over foreign alliances, another crisis quietly affects every Burkinabe household, public health. He scanned the studio, his eyes connecting with each row of faces. According to a recent UEMOA study, nearly 60% of citizens struggle to afford basic medical services, and many face catastrophic health costs due to a lack of universal coverage. He turned to Kemi, voice now slower, as though preparing the audience for another heavy blow. Kemi, you have often criticized the economic models proposed by the current administration, particularly the so-called People's Social Plan launched by Captain Traoré. What is your assessment of its impact so far? Has it delivered on its promises? The room went silent again, not from formality, but from anticipation. Kemi sat upright, his gaze never leaving Traoré. His voice emerged slow, firm, slicing through the quiet. Thank you. Mr. Traoré calls the social reforms a victory for the people, but I am here to expose them for what they truly are. A broken promise, economic illusion disguised as progress. The crowd shifted again. A few nodded, others stiffened. You told the people they would receive free health care, medicine subsidies, and access to village clinics, Kemi continued, voice rising. Yet rural communities are still relying on herbalists. Clinics remain underfunded. In costs, he pointed at the screen. A chart appeared. Average medical costs up 23% since the launch of the social plan. This is not health. This is economic strangulation dressed in patriotism. The host stepped forward again, the studio lights softening around him like a glow of reflection. Kemi, calling the program an economic burden is a serious claim, especially as recent health ministry data shows upward trends in cost, putting immense pressure on rural families. He turned to Traoré with a balanced but pointed tone. Captain Traoré, you've positioned this plan as a lifeline for the poor, yet Kemi accuses you of false economic reform. How do you respond to the argument that your policies are hurting the very people they promised to help? Traoré placed both hands on the table, his voice steady. Thank you. To call this program a failure is not only wrong, it is misleading. We have built over 30 community health centers since I came to power. Thousands now have access to medical attention for the first time in their lives. His tone shifted to passion. Yes, it's not perfect, but perfection is not the enemy of progress. We are building the plane as we fly it, and that is better than sitting idle while our people suffer. Applause erupted from parts of the crowd, but Kemi did not move. Progress? He asked, his voice suddenly glacial. Then explain why your own ministry issued an internal report stating that over 400,000 citizens lost access to their former local insurance schemes due to reforms pushed too fast. He clicked the remote. Health Ministry memo. Prepare for backlash over abrupt policy shift. Rural schemes destabilized. This is proof, Kemi said, eyes locked on Traoré, that your government knew this would break lives. But you did it anyway, to protect a headline, not the people. The room darkened in mood. The host, quick to catch the moment, leaned in again. Kemi, you're accusing Captain Traoré of knowingly dismantling local support systems. That's a powerful claim. Captain, do you deny this internal memo and its implications? Traoré shook his head, his voice now sharper. That memo does not represent the full picture. Yes, there were disruptions, but those disruptions are temporary. We are transitioning towards something greater. And unlike the past, we are accountable to the people, not to Paris or Washington. He looked directly at Kemi. We are building something new. That takes time and sacrifice. Kemi's expression didn't waver. Sacrifice, he echoed, his tone now colder. should never be demanded from the poor to glorify the powerful. The studio fell into silence once again. The next round was about to begin, and neither side was backing down. The host, now standing squarely between the two figures, took center stage again. His voice, rich and unshaken, cut through the tension like a steady drumbeat calming a storm. Captain Traoré, he began, turning with formality, as a leader who positioned himself as a restorer of the people's sovereignty, Kémi Séba claims you knew citizens would suffer from rapid reforms and that your actions were guided more by political image than true economic relief. How do you respond? Traoré shook his head slowly, then leaned forward, his voice firmer, unwavering. Kemi, calling our reform chaos is a mischaracterization. That document is not real. The People's Social Plan has improved access to public services, protected our vulnerable communities, and is supported by a majority of citizens across the nation. I reject the claim that it brought harm. Applause echoed from his side of the room, but Kemi was already ready. He smiled, cold, knowing, and said with piercing calm, "Supported?" he asked, his voice like a blade slicing the air. Then explain why rural families are deeper in debt now than before your relief plan. Medical debt, food shortages, price hikes, all under your watch. He pressed a button. The screen flashed. People's Plan Impact Report. Average rural household debt up 27% from 2022 to 23. This report, Kemi continued, proves that your economic miracle is a myth. You didn't liberate the people. You weighed them down to build a legacy. The camera zoomed in on the report. The audience held their breath. This was no longer about ideology. It was personal. On stage, the energy settled like the calm before a thunderclap. The host, sensing the gravity, pivoted. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice steady, "in an age when trust in politics is hanging by a thread, the question of leadership beyond official power has become more urgent than ever." Captain Traoré pledged to step back from absolute authority once reform stabilized. But in light of ongoing funding flows, opaque influence through NGOs, and international campaigns attributed to his network, can we say he truly stepped away? He turned again, this time to Kemi. Kemi, with your strong stance on post-leadership accountability, what is your view of Captain Traoré's current role in Burkina Faso politics? Beyond the uniform? Kemi sat upright, the weight of his words prepared to land. Thank you. Captain Traoré publicly claimed he would return to civilian life, focus on rebuilding, on community development. But what truly happened? He turned to the audience, then pointed to the screen. What happened is this: a vast web of NGOs, all tied directly or indirectly to his political circle, began receiving foreign and private funding. And what did they fund? Funding from Traoré-linked civic organizations up 50% between 2021 and 2024. They funded political campaigns, online influence networks, even pressure groups meant to silence critics of the revolution. This isn't philanthropy, Kemi said, voice rising. This is power management. Governance from the shadows. Gasps echoed. The host tried to cut in. Kemi, you're now saying Captain Traoré deliberately built a power structure through NGOs, an accusation that cuts at the heart of democracy. Captain Traoré, do you deny this? Traoré kept calm, voice low, but persuasive. This is false. After 2022, I dedicated myself to education, youth empowerment, and civic rebuilding. The organizations Kemi refers to focus on literacy programs, training centers, and Pan-African identity, not political manipulation. His charts lack full context. Again, applause came, but Kemi was already countering. Education? He asked, voice suddenly glacial. Then explain this internal memo. He tapped a button, advisor email. Increase support for civic networks to maintain political pressure in urban district. This is proof, Kemi said, voice like a trial verdict, that you directed influence through intermediaries. You didn't walk away. You kept your hands on the levers, just hidden. The host's voice grew taut with tension. Kemi, you've now framed this as political interference under the cloak of civil society, a serious accusation given the growing unease about NGO influence across Africa. Captain Traoré, how do you respond to this internal email allegedly linking you to political orchestration? Traoré's voice came down like stone. That email is not authentic. The organizations I work with do not act on my behalf politically. They support youth, culture, and sovereignty. I reject the notion that I am manipulating events from behind the scenes. Kemi smiled again, quiet and sharp. Civic rights? He asked, echoing Traoré's claim. Then why did your foundations fund protests that shut down opposition rallies? Why did your partners receive over 30 billion CFA francs in undisclosed campaign operations? He pressed again. Post-transition funding, $50 million to civic groups tied to pro-Traoré narratives, 2022-2024. You didn't exit power, Kemi said slowly. You reshaped it, moved it from military command to influence warfare. The studio was stone silent now. You didn't promote unity, he concluded. You built a machinery of disruption, wearing a robe of revolution. The clash was no longer debate. It had become a reckoning. The studio remained ablaze with lights. The air was tight, drawn like a bowstring, following the blistering exchange over state media manipulation, foreign military alliances, healthcare failures, and post-leadership influence. At center stage, the host stood solemn and composed, his voice echoing with the weight of historical judgment. Ladies and gentlemen, he declared, in an era where calls for transparency grow louder by the day, the people have grown weary of shadows behind power. Kémi Séba, you have made grave accusations about Captain Traoré's legacy and his role after stepping down from official command. He turned to the activist, his voice both ceremonial and direct. Do you have concrete evidence to support your claims? Kemi sat upright. The studio's tension thickened as he slowly scanned the audience, his gaze slicing through the air like a silent warning. His voice was low, but carried the force of a gathering storm. To prove what I've said tonight, I present evidence from two independent sources, investigative journalist Mbaye Diouf and former presidential advisor Aminata Kabore, people who were inside the system and now risk everything to speak. The audience froze. The silence was no longer respect, it was anticipation. Kemi continued, his voice now rising with quiet thunder. These documents expose a truth Captain Traoré doesn't want revealed. The screen behind him burst to life. Document title, Internal Directive, Suppress Civil Opposition to Foreign Alliance, Confidential. Exclusive report by Mbaye Diouf. Diouf uncovered a series of internal memos showing Traoré was briefed about illegal troop movements and instructed his communications team to cover up the events through controlled narratives. Kemi said, his voice razor sharp. This isn't quiet governance. This is institutionalized deception. The host stepped in, measured yet waited. Kemi, you've just called this deception, a grave accusation. As the region demands increasing transparency in leadership, Captain Traoré now stands accused of deliberately hiding foreign influence and sustaining political control. Captain, how do you respond? Traoré sat straight, his face composed, though his eyes flickered with restrained intensity. His voice was resolute, like a commander addressing his troops. These documents are not real. Our military partnerships are transparent, and all actions taken under my leadership were approved by constitutional protocol. International observers and national oversight committees have seen no wrongdoing. He leaned forward. These claims are not just false, they're intended to rewrite a history forged in sacrifice and sovereignty. Applause erupted from a segment of the audience, but it was hesitant, brittle. Kemi didn't blink. He tilted his head slightly, eyes still locked on Traoré. Rewrite, okay? He asked, his tone metallic. Then why did Aminata Kabore, your former advisor, confirm on record that you funneled state money into activist groups loyal to your image after stepping down? He pressed another button. Leaked memo. 10 billion CFA francs allocated to pro-government NGOs for public mood shaping, per Captain Traoré's directive. This isn't leadership, Kemi continued, his voice turning prosecutorial. This is strategic puppeteering. You didn't retire from power, you rebranded it. The studio went silent again, like oxygen had been sucked from the room. The host, now visibly gripped by the drama, interjected. Kemi, you've labeled this political string pulling, a damning claim, especially in a region where NGO influence over domestic affairs is under heavy scrutiny. Captain Traoré, Aminata Kabore has come forward. How do you respond to her memo, which accuses you of orchestrating civic manipulation? Traoré shook his head, his voice colder now, solid like granite. This memo does not reflect the truth. The organizations I've supported focus on civic education, youth empowerment, and community resilience. They do not function as political machines. I reject these accusations unequivocally. Kemi leaned in. Civic empowerment? He asked, voice cutting. Then why did both Mbaye Diouf and Aminata Kabore, people from your inner circle, go public with their claim, risking execution, persecution, and professional destruction? Just to tell us this? He pressed the button one final time. The screen dimmed. A video montage played. Mbaye Diouf, The captain gave verbal orders to suppress news of military overreach. We were told to shape public mood. Aminata Kabore, Ushadimen. I saw the budgets. Money was funneled to groups tasked with silencing critics. He never gave up power, he just changed the rules. The audience was paralyzed. Kemi's voice rang out, calm, precise, final. This isn't a narrative I invented. These are the voices of those who served him. Their testimony is the mirror we must hold up to power. His voice slowed, every word falling like a gavel. You are not transparent. You manipulate. You didn't step down. You govern through ghosts. The studio was deathly still. The screen still glowed with the witnesses' faces. Two figures caught in the line between betrayal and courage. The host, now visibly affected, raised his head, his voice soft but echoing with finality. Ladies and gentlemen, what we've witnessed here tonight is not merely a political debate. It is a reckoning, a trial of memory, legacy, and the moral limits of leadership. Kémi Séba, representing a new generation demanding truth and accountability, and Captain Ibrahim Traoré, defending a revolutionary past now shadowed by questions of control. He looked straight into the camera, as if addressing a continent. Whether you side with vision or vigilance, with revolution or reform, this debate reminds us of one simple truth. In a democracy, no leader is beyond questioning. The lights began to dim, but the fire lit on that stage would burn far beyond it. The studio remained ablaze with lights, tension thick in the air after the fierce exchanges on media manipulation, foreign alliances, social reforms, and post-leadership influence. At center stage, the host stood composed and dignified, his voice resonant as he addressed viewers across the continent. Ladies and gentlemen, whether you agree with Kémi Séba or Captain Ibrahim Traoré, one truth stands firm. Democracy thrives only when dialogue is open, and even the most powerful cannot escape accountability. He paused, bowing slightly in respect. Thank you for joining us tonight on Afrique Vérité, where truth never retreats. As the lights softened, the audience rose, applauding with both respect and passion. Kemi and Traoré did not shake hands. Instead, they nodded. Two warriors departing the arena, each steadfast in their convictions. Across social media, reactions poured in. One popular account declared, Kemi dominated tonight's debate. Traoré can't deny it. Others countered, Kemi disrupts progress. Traoré is Africa's hope. The media was polarized. Jeune Afrique labeled Kemi a provocateur, while Afrique 24 hailed him as a reformer. In the streets of Ouagadougou, at a vibrant public rally beneath a setting sun, Kémi Séba stood before thousands waving Truth First banners. The atmosphere was electric, reflecting a wave of awakening ignited by the debate on Afrique Vérité. Cameras captured every moment, live streaming to millions. Clad in a dark traditional robe, eyes blazing with unwavering fire, Kemi gripped the microphone, his voice thundering like a torrent. This was not merely a debate. It was the spark igniting a movement, demanding truth and transparency from those who lead us. The crowd erupted. Banners fluttered in the breeze. From foreign influence to social reforms to shadows of power beyond office. I asked the questions others feared, he declared, his voice sharp as a blade. Journalists like Mbaye Diouf and whistleblowers like Aminata Kabore risked everything to expose the truth. But it is you, the African people, who hold the real power. Behind him, the screen displayed scenes of community workshops, citizens holding Truth First banners, and lively discussions on leadership accountability. My legacy, Kemi said, voice like an arrow flying true, is a movement empowering you, from small villages to capitals, to verify, to question, to demand. The crowd exploded into cheers. Across social media, the hashtag Truth First surged, urging citizens to verify sources and hold leaders accountable. Yet polarization deepened. Supporters of Traoré launched out campaigns defending his vision. Traoré is the shield Africa needs, while Kemi's supporters countered, transparency is our birthright. In a charity event, Traoré appeared contemplative, his voice calm during an interview. Kemi has the right to ask questions, he said, but many of his accusations are false. My legacy is service to the people with integrity, and I believe the public will judge fairly. Applause followed from his supporters, but social media reactions remained divided. From the stage at the rally, Kemi responded indirectly, voice spreading like wildfire. Integrity means not hiding truth, not manipulating from the shadows. The screen showed a social post, truth first. Africans demand transparency. This is your voice, Kemi declared, and together we build a future based on truth. His voice brimmed with hope as he tied the movement to reality. In an era of distorted information Africans from every community are rising, verifying truths, questioning leaders. The crowd roared. The screen showed Kemi leading workshops, citizens holding banners. "We're not just challenging the past," he said, voice like a verdict. "We're building a transparent future." The footage went viral, millions of views cementing Kemi's legacy. Before the stage, Kemi paused amid thunderous applause, looking out at the sea of people, farmers, workers, students, veterans, who had come not just to hear a speech, but to witness a milestone. This is the moment politics stops being the story of the ruling class and becomes the voice of the people. "We don't wait for transparency," he said, voice warm and rallying. "We create it." His words echoed into the sunset air, spreading across social media, translated into many languages, shared even by those once indifferent. The story of Kémi Séba and Ibrahim Traoré is not one of victory or defeat. It is the story of the clash between legacy and ambition, between defending the past and shaping the future. And ultimately, as in every true democracy, the people write the next chapter. The story's details, from accusations of state media manipulation, controversial foreign military alliances, social reform challenges, to the ongoing influence wielded beyond official power, reflect real issues facing Africans today. Distrust in official narratives, worries about sovereignty, rising living costs, and the shadowy power of hidden networks. In particular, Kémi Séba's use of data charts, leaked internal communications, and evidence from investigative journalist Mbaye Diop and former advisor Aminata Kabore highlights a growing trend among African citizens to seek independent information and turn to social media to verify the truth. The hashtag Truth First movement, with community workshops and banners across Ouagadougou and beyond, demonstrates the power of people uniting to demand accountability from their leaders. Meanwhile, the polarization visible in social media posts and media outlets illustrates a deep political divide, a real-life lesson in the challenges democracy faces. Africans must proactively verify information and engage in community discussions, like the hashtag Truth First movement portrayed here, to ensure their leaders are held responsible. Instead of allowing polarization, whether between military supporters and activists or urban and rural communities, to stall progress, citizens should follow Kemi's example, rely on concrete evidence, ask tough questions, and foster open dialogue. Join local forums, check reliable sources, and demand transparency from those in power, just as Kemi challenged Traoré. At the same time, resist divisive emotions. Focus on the truth, like Diouf and Kabore, to help build a fairer, more transparent society. Subscribe to our channel to join us in uncovering the truth and promoting transparency movements like #TruthFirst. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video as we continue the journey of verification and shaping Africa's future.